Welcome to Gas, the true story of a toxic train derailment. I'm Ron Scholl. Last time on Gas, when the jury found MRL not guilty of negligence and Sam Austin received nothing, the jury foreman felt duped by the process. We now continue with Part 6, Chapter 25, Insiders. Bob B.J. McComb lived on Plateau Road about 1.5 miles west of the derailment site in the original Northern Pacific signal maintainer station circa 1912. He spoke with a rough, strained voice, the words falling plumb straight. Rail Link is a bunch of tight fuckers, he said. McComb started out on the Northern Pacific in 1957 as a signalman helper. In 1966, the Plateau job came open, and McComb settled in as the signal maintainer for the MP, BN, and MRL lines until November 1997 when he retired. He witnessed the transition to MRL's high rail pickup, done mainly because they stretched the territories, he said. Then I would run from West Frenchtown to East St. Regis. I think it's 52 miles, about twice his old territory. To save money, I'm sure, he said. Over a period of time, they kept cutting people here and there, you know. The change in operations was obvious as soon as MRL took over, and McComb likened the new ownership as a bunch of little kids with a life-size Lionel, tight-fisted with money and generally not railroad savvy. They ain't got a railroader among the whole fucking bunch, he said. MRL brought in inexperienced workers, and supervision was terrible, McComb said. I think we had one BN roadmaster stay, and that was Augie Cantu. Of the new ones, some of them were clerks, he said. Some of them were foremen. There were guys set up that they were just dinglings. They made them roadmasters. Along with the hiring and promotion of inexperienced workers came quite a bit less pay. Signalmen took $1 an hour cut, McComb said. The track people, the section laborers, took $3 an hour cut. At the same time, MRL reduced personnel and expanded workloads, putting pressure on those remaining. More and more for less and less. At Superior, there was 11 guys on the track department, McComb said. Now there's 2 or 3. Reductions also reflected modern advances. Some was technology, McComb said, but you got to remember, Keller came off the Sioux line, the Milwaukee. He had the Milwaukee mentality. Over here they had a section foreman and laborer on every fucking section. That's all. You can't even change any fucking rail with 2 guys. The last few years Milwaukee run it, they had a derailment every day between Havre and here. They were taking rotten ties out and turning them over. But MRL was out to make money, not close down the line. McComb recalled one MRL supervisor who tried to push him and other signal workers beyond a 12-hour day. He would have people exceeding it, McComb said. The government should have fined him. We turned it in, nothing ever did take place. It's bad. It was bad. McComb recalled the time an MRL employee was inspecting track on his territory while an FRA inspector with a radar gun observed him. I was at the Superior Depot. The inspector told the employee, "Were you inspecting track today?" He says, "Yes." He says, "Well, you went across the switch at West Sear at 35 miles per hour. He radared him. And then he says, "You went across the switch at East Superior at 25 miles an hour. The employee, he was all worried that he was going to get fired. But I don't know what happened. McComb attributed the rush to pressure from above. I'm sure everybody had their balls to the wall to get done, and them guys weren't getting no overtime. So if they didn't get done on straight time, they were burning their own time. Whereas the old BN track inspectors were hourly pay. They got overtime. In addition to his 12-hour days, McComb put in significant overtime with MRL. The last year, I was working about 600 hours overtime. Pretty soon you could get tired of that too, so you take the phone off the hook. They were going to drag your goddamn ass right into the ground if you let them. McComb compared track maintenance under BN with MRL. I don't think you could find anybody who had ever seen the track in such shitty shape. They would just run them and run them. He thought back to his trial testimony. They wanted to know if Earl Perrine was a good track inspector, and Roger, and Augie. Yeah, they were conscientious. They were. But I should have said they'd done everything they were allowed to do. So who did Macomb ultimately hold responsible for the deterioration in track conditions? Keller, he said. Oh, hell yes. He was chief engineer. When MRL took over from BN, Macomb recalled a quantum shift in conditions. Oh, hell yes. I've never seen so many broken rails. I don't know if it was due to the maintenance of the roadbed or we run the shit out of trains too, more so than BN did. MRL inherited some new rail from BN ready for relay, Macomb recalled. After they initially used up all the rail that BN had left here to be put in, then they just didn't order anymore, you know? They run it and run it and run it. And we would find a curve that was just completely fucking shot, like down there at 9 Mile one time. The fucking rail, I think, was about that wide. Macomb held his fingers less than 2 inches apart to indicate the railhead. And they had been pulling the spikes and pushing it, keeping it engaged. I couldn't find a place to put the fucking bond on. Signalman welded wire to the outside of the ball of the head to carry the main track circuit. That was curve 143, he said. It's real sharp. They said they would change that. They brought in old rail that was a little wider. They got it off some curve that they had put new rail on. Worn rail cascaded onto a sharp curve to replace worse rail. And then they put the wear on the outside, Macomb said. When we transpose it, a lot of times we do it that way anyway. But that's how it got so bad down there. It was war on the outside and it was war on the inside. It's getting so war, you would almost be right into the eye of it there. The web. We had so many broken rails and we had angle bars, a lot of them in there. That curve probably had 15 or 20 angle bars. An angle or joint bar held rail segments together. It was all ribbon, but we cut so many out that we had to bolt it back together. Frankenrail. And like I told Keller that one day when he told me I wasn't a track engineer, I said, well, the way I see it, when your flanges are hitting the joint bar, your fucking rail is wore out. Macomb recalled another extraordinarily worn curve the summer of 1997. Curve 195, I think it is. It was very, very bad. Real slow, but it was a bad worn rail. We wound up with a lot of joints. They brought in some of that rail that was actually taken out of a scrap pile. They'd done that a lot, come to think of it. Replacing badly worn rail with old discarded rail. It was taken out and due to be scrapped. It was ready to be loaded, and then they would come up short, need some to keep the railroad running, so they would go dig it out of there. They'd hide it, take the curve out, and pull it out in the brush. A year or so later, go pull it out of the brush and put it back on the track somewhere. Macomb often helped change rail after Sperry Rail Services had done an inspection run. Macomb was under the impression that Sperry told MRL that curve 155 had to be changed. That there was so many vertical split heads, he said, but that was never brought out. He didn't have the documentation from his old call books, but he generally recalled a lot of vertical split heads in the area of curve 155. I had a lot of broken rails, I know that, Macomb said. A broken signal usually signified broken rail. He would lose the circuit and track it down to the break. Sometimes, vertical split heads would break clear down through the rail and cut the circuit. If MRL litigation experts would not admit to a connection between rail wear and broken rails, railroader Macomb would. You're doing away with the intent of the rail, he said. The whole geometry of it, actually. You're wearing the hell out of the gauge side, moving in toward the web more. Then you turn that son of a bitch around and move it some more. You're hanging off that web. I would say you're putting a hell of a lot of stress on that web. Macomb also thought MRL grinded rail significantly more than BN had. They'd come out and grind the living shit out of it. It seems like after they'd done that, we had a lot of broken rails, too. In a typical year comparing broken rails in his territory under BN, Macomb said, I would damn near say we had half again as many under MRL. It got more and more and more. In comparing curve wear under BN, Macomb said MRL just kind of threw out the engineering book out the window. I can remember BN doing the emergency relays. I never heard of this outfit doing it. What I mean is, bring in a load of rail and knock it out and change it out because it was wore out. This outfit, they would, predict. Oh, that rail down there isn't due for another year, Macomb said. Macomb recalled the conversation with Keller in September 1995. I said a lot of things to him over the years because he was such a goddamn hardhead. That particular statement, I said, it's a hell of a lot easier, cheaper to lay new rail in there than it is to pick up a derailment. You would have a hell of a mess. As the lawyers would ask, was McComb talking specifically about Curve 155? Oh shit, I don't know. I talked about all of them. There was a lot of them, McComb answered, a sweeping indictment reminiscent of Billy Shutter's opinion to Bill Brodsky about the general poor condition of MRL track. Like I say, when the goddamn flange is hitting the angle bars, that son of a bitch is wore up, I think. Under BN, McComb said, back in the old days, it was up to the roadmaster to keep his goddamn territory in good enough shape. My observation was it was under the direction of Keller, that the roadmasters were just pissing posts, They were in charge of their men, but they couldn't spend any fucking money, I guess. He would come out and tell them, oh, we can't have that. Shit, that's still good. McComb also blamed those higher up. Brodsky is the president, he said. Anytime I would bitch to him, he would say, well, that's Keller's deal. As for the Alberton derailment, 5 years had passed, and McComb didn't know if Curve 155 had been slow ordered or had a rough spot called in before the derailment. But the track had been generally troublesome, he said. I mean, every morning when we would go to work at Superior, the section would have a list of rough spots, he said. But a vertical split head appearing on any curve was no mystery to McComb. I think fatigue on the rails was what contributed. The rail was so wore. Hell, it fatigues. Ton miles, man. A lot of ton miles are on the road. The problem was management, not the workers. With track problems so prevalent, when a rough spot was reported, the section crews were too understaffed to always take care of things right away. 3 guys, McComb said. What the hell? You got a lot of shit to take care of. A lot of rough track, too. Despite his open criticism of MRL, McComb was still an ex-railroader living by a railroad town. He said absolutely there was community resistance to blaming the railroad for the spill. Despite having some chronic health problems from the spill, McComb said, I didn't get on the bandwagon to start with because I was working for them. Oh hell, I thought, they'll take care of you. That type of feeling, McComb settled his claim early. I think the old railroaders off to Milwaukee, they didn't raise any hell, They took what was offered peacefully. Those that wanted good settlement, weren't railroaders. Even now, McComb's complaints were less about the health aftermath of the spill than about MRL's operations in general. He had been subpoenaed by Lyon and Chandler for the Austin trial to testify, though it was perfectly clear at trial that no love was lost between McComb and MRL attorney Randy Cox. Never deposed, McComb said he could have given plaintiff attorneys more information. McComb recalled the chunk of styrofoam rail that Cox showed the jury. He should have went in there with a good rail, he said. They had no idea what a good rail looked like. Tracker, a pseudonym, spent many years working on section crews both with BN and MRL. He wished to be anonymous because he genuinely feared MRL would screw around with his retirement. Like other union workers during the MRL takeover in 1987, Tracker faced staying with BN and moving his household, or being bought out if he had seniority, or hiring with MRL and taking a pay cut and losing some benefits. We had lost a big chunk of our medical that we had to start paying out of our own pocket, he said. So yeah, it was a tragic cut in many, many ways. As for operation changes under MRL, Tracker said, our territories expanded a little bit, but not that much. What hurt us the most was we lost the manpower. They cut back an awful lot. We were always behind. Manpower was always something that we could use more of, but they were always wanting to cut back. Sections used to have a foreman and 8 or 9 workers in 2 crews, and under MRL dropped to a single crew of a truck driver, a laborer, and a foreman. Technology alone hadn't driven the changes. You still have back-breaking work out there to be done, Tracker said. Then they expect the rail to be changed quicker with less men. They'd scream and yell, you're holding the train up, when you've only got 3 guys out there. And that's if you can get a hold of 3 guys. We're not on call 24 hours a day. We don't sit by the phone. Thus, let it go till morning. Resources were short as well. I noticed there was a lot of cutbacks on buying material, Tracker said. We had steel all laid out for the BN when the MRL took over. We picked the steel all back up, and it went someplace else. But yeah, there was a lot of different changes that were going on. Burlington Northern had been pretty strict on regulations, trackers said, but we could even see it back then. It was changing. You've got to understand that these railroads are a business, and they want to make the business as profitable as possible without having to put too much into it. And their biggest loss I feel, is human error, which means injuries. So if they get rid of as many of these crews as possible, they get rid of the union. They contract, they bring in non-union contracts, come in and do all the work. That's what they're looking for, because these contractors can pay their helpers $6, $7 an hour, and they'll get out there and bust their butts. But when employees were overworked, injuries and accidents became inevitable. You know you have to get the job done, so you push a little bit harder, he said, and that's when things start happening. The injuries were there for a reason, including rushed work. It's starting to sound like the Milwaukee, Tracker recalled in 2001. But MRL was not in its end days. On the railroad part, it was a good living, he said. I liked my job. I liked the work that was there. I liked the camaraderie that you had with the men. BJ probably told you a lot of that stuff. You know, they would pull things that you knew weren't right, but you went along with it because it was your job. Like McComb, Tracker laid the blame on supervisors. I would say it's from the assistant roadmasters on up, he said. They send them to these schools. They just push you and push you and push you. That's why there are so many alcoholics and drug abuse among young section workers. These people are away from their homes for so long, it pushes you to the limit. Tracker was a bit circumspect in answering whether maintenance was deferred because of cutbacks and the increased tonnage by 1995. You'd have days where you'd be packed, just train after train after train, and you'd just be playing dodgeball with them, trying to get out and get the track done and everything. And trying to get track in time for dispatchers sometimes was just literally impossible. But you have to get the job done, so you wind up, alternative ways of getting the job done. Did Tracker think rail was getting more worn at this time than normal? Well, we always had that sense, he said. We always feel that we can run rail a little more. Residents in the area had their own casual knowledge of track conditions. Mike Graff lived on the western edge of Alberton. A former railroader, a week or two before the 1996 derailment, he did some walking along the track. That track was in such bad repair, I wouldn't have sent a train over it, he said. They were sending them over it all day. We're talking at least 1 hour every day and all night. Since the derailment, Graff said in 1999, trains in the area seem to have slowed down. Now it's slower. Back then, I don't know what their speed restriction was. Wide open, Graff's wife suggested wryly. Jay Stiles of Southside Road noted, since the spill, they've come out and done a lot more maintenance than they ever had. Still, I can tell you, they go too fast sometimes. Oh man, when it starts shaking you out of bed at 1 o'clock at night, and then you hear cars going by that have a flat wheel on them and bearings going out on them. Every time I hear trains going by anymore, if I'm laying in bed, I will just listen to it intently until the sound is just totally gone before I can relax. Because I know it's going to happen again. It's just a matter of time. Yet, to some, it all seemed in the hands of God. Next time on Gas, the true story of a toxic train derailment, we consider all of the evidence and information surrounding the Alberton derailment and the obstruction of the EPA and other government agencies and responders in the immediate days following the derailment, to offer a reasoned explanation for the Montana Rail Link derailment and the obstruction. Until then, this is Ron Scholl. Thanks for listening. This podcast is adapted from the book Gas, the true story of a toxic train derailment. Visit Amazon.com to see the 2-book series. To access support material in the book, such as maps, photos, illustrations, and video links, visit my Facebook page Gas, the true story, or watch my Gas playlist on my YouTube channel at RL Scholl.